In a relationship, when is honesty not the best policy? How do you balance what you want versus what you need? And is there something you need to say to your spouse but can't find the right way to say it? If so, then you're in the right place. This is the Lunch with Sandy podcast. With nearly 20 years of marriage under their belts, Terrence and Sandy Jackson discuss a range of topics, provide valuable insights on relationships, and talk about the conversations married couples need to have. So what does lunch have to do with all of this? Well, it's a metaphor for how these conversations originally started. Speaking of conversations, let's get one going. Here's your hosts, Terrence and Sandy.
Welcome to the Lunch with Sandy podcast, where we have the conversations that married couples need to have. I'm Terrence.
And I'm Sandy.
And Sandy, today we're going to be talking about a four-letter word.
Uh-oh.
But before we get to that four-letter word, how you doing today?
I'm doing good. Feeling
Nice.
good.
Feeling good, looking good. It was a nice sunny day today.
Yes.
Had a nice ride.
Yep. It was a very nice ride, actually,
And then you fell asleep outside.
which is my favorite place to fall asleep.
Listen, one day you're going to be laying outside on those chairs next to the pool and a bird's going to drop a load on you. I don't know if you noticed, but even that table that's underneath the pergola has some bird poop on it.
Yeah.
There's like 3 or 4 of them. Mm-hmm. So they're on they're on the attack.
The attack.
Yeah. I don't know if you took some of their food or what, but you better be mindful of those birds. All right, enough about the bird crap. Let's get into the spotlight of the week. Now, this week is a very, very important week. You know why?
Why?
Kids went back to school.
Hallelujah.
Kids went back to school. And so you know who I'm shining a light on this week?
Who's that?
Teachers. Got to shine a light on the teachers for all they do in guiding our children through their educational path.
Yeah, because I certainly could not.
No, me neither. And for taking some of these kids off some of these parents' hands, because, you know, some of these parents, you know, they need a break.
Yes.
So now, back to that 4-letter word that I was talking about. And before you go that route, get your mind out of the gutter, because I'm not talking about one of those 4-letter words.
As soon as you said
This-
4-letter word, it instantly went into the gutter.
This is not one of those 4-letter words. The 4-letter word I am talking about is love.
Oh, the sweet 4-letter word.
The sweet. I mean, in
guess.
some cases it's sweet. In some cases,
Sour.
yeah. Well, you know, yeah. To that point, different people have their own interpretation of what love is. Now, I will say that in most cases, there are some similarities. There's some.
Okay.
People, I mean, people are different in the way that they love is different.
Yep.
And so I don't want to cast aspersions or tell anyone how they should love.
My love language is yelling at people.
Listen, in some cases it is. Some cases it is.
It's
So-
not, but yeah, some people it is.
Here is the question that I have. And because, well, let me take a step back. I'm going to ask this question. And I asked this question because I've heard so many songs about it. Matter of fact, there was a song on the other day. The question that I want to ask is, first I got to ask the question, and then we got to get more in detail about what it actually means. Is love blind? That's the question, right? So you meet someone, you fall madly in love. They can do no wrong. Right? That's listen, when you are first in the throes of your romantic relationship,
Can do no wrong. I don't
Well,
know about
I mean-
that, but okay. We'll go with it.
that's where do you think the phrase comes from?
No? Yeah.
So when you talk about that 4-letter word, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to think about what that means. And when you first meet, I'm using air quotes here, the love of your life,
Okay.
there are just some things that you either can't see or are just blinded by because of love.
You think it's blinded, or do you think you also think that you can deal with whatever it
Well,
is?
we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that, right? So let's first talk about what does it mean, or what does someone mean when they say love is blind?
But all right, so I think for starters, it's probably in the bad sense. It's sometimes hard to see somebody's red flags.
It's I would agree with you. I would say it's the inability or the unwillingness to see flaws in that person who you care so much about.
Right, like everybody else around you can see it, but you can't.
Well, when it's like when everyone is saying the same thing, the question becomes, okay, well, are they all just saying that same thing to be in unison? Because everyone can't possibly be seeing the same thing.
Yeah.
That's what happens. And then you're in that mushy gushy lovey dovey phase.
Yeah.
And maybe you're just all about the positive.
Yeah. I can change them.
I don't even think it's that.
I don't even think it's that either. I think they just don't. Either they don't see it or they just don't care to see it.
I think in the beginning, first and foremost, you're in that lust phase.
Well, and it's not
that's number one.
All bad stuff.
No,
I'm just saying specifically to this topic of not being able to pick up on those red flags.
You know what I say, when you watch TV show and the TV show has, and I'm going to get dark for a second, the TV show has someone who has killed a couple of people and they interview the neighbors and the neighbors always say, oh, he was just such a sweet boy. I would have never have imagined. There had to have been signs. But anyway,
right.
Back to love.
All the cats went missing in the neighborhood.
I went dark for a minute. I gotta bring it back. I think that when you first get involved with somebody, it's very romantic. And that's what you're focusing on. You're focusing on that romantic side of things.
Yep.
So from the perspective of flaws, I think it comes down to this. When you first meet someone and there's that attraction and you get together and it's romantic, it's not so much that you think that individual is perfect.
Right.
I think it's a situation where the positive aspect of who that person is,
yep,
is what you're seeing for the most part. Yeah. And I guess the question has to be asked, why? And for each person, it's different, right?
Well, I would hope and think that in the beginning, too, they make you feel good. They make you feel special and that, you're the only one for them. You're unique. You're beautiful. All this wonderful stuff. Like it's all, hopefully, for the most part, positive feelings to make you, like I said, feel good. So it ends up maybe being like where, they might overlook some of the other things.
Yeah, and I think in the beginning of every relationship, I think that there's always a bit more leeway to an extent. Like again, if you're going over and you're finding fingers and things like that, yeah, you may want to rethink that relationship. But I
Right.
do think that when you first,
we're not talking about the volatile ones. We're just talking about the ones that are
the flaws, the little flaws.
Right. The average relationship, but maybe the person has a little bit of flaws.
I would imagine that in every relationship in the beginning, when you're into that person, you give them a little bit more leeway. And again, we're talking about the little stuff. We're not talking about, I opened up the icebox and there was a hand in there. I don't know why I keep going that way.
You're in a dark mood today.
I didn't eat lunch today, so.
Yeah, that was not a good move. But, right, like, wow, he always leaves the cap off the tube of the toothpaste. Not that you do that, but I'm just saying that was the best I could
Is that really a flaw?
I would think so, yeah.
Well, listen, we gotta.
That definitely it would be.
We're gonna have to define the term flaw. If leaving the cap off the toothpaste is a flaw, you got to define that.
Well, what should be the flaw then? Why does he look at every other female when she walks by?
Listen,
Like
that's
that
something.
kind of flaw?
That's something that listen.
I
That's
wasn't sure what level of floor we would go.
I'm not talking about stuff you nitpick like, oh, he don't put the toilet seat down. I'm talking about, well, you know what? He yelled at your mama, and you let it slide. Mm-hmm. No, he's Portuguese. That's how he talks. Sound familiar?
I never yelled at your mama.
Yeah, well, that's true. Yeah, you got me on that one. I think also we have to keep in mind that if you're just in that beginning part of a relationship, first and foremost, I said it's the you're in that lust phase. You're thinking with your heart, not with your head. Yeah.
And it could also be where you're having conversations with the person and they say, I'm sorry, I won't do that next time, or I'll do better.
Well, see, if you're having the conversation with...
So you're thinking like that's just... But I mean, like you might be having it 50 times by the time you're like 2 months in. I guess you're like, it's fine. We talk about it.
Yeah, I guess. So if you're going to, like if you tell your friends, we talk about it, then I don't know if that classifies as love being blind. It classifies as you might be, a little sprung or a little dense because now you notice it. But when I typically hear that term, it's a situation where everyone else sees something that you actually either don't see or refuse to see. And then, and there's the difference there, right? Because, it's a situation where if you don't see it, you don't see it. But if you see it and you just push that to the back of your mind.
So what do you think about love is blind when it comes to looks? Like, how did he catch her?
Well, listen, that's, again, looks are overrated. We talked about this the last conversation we had.
So, but that's another one where love could be blind.
See, I was going dark for a second. Sandy's just, listen, she just...
I'm going shallow.
Yeah. Let's get out of the shallow. Let's get out of the shallow end of the pool for a minute. I mean, that's one of the things where, and I'll speak on it just very briefly. Then I'm not sticking around in that shallow end of the pool. Attraction comes in many forms. Mm-hmm. I said this the last episode.
We did.
Looks can be overrated. You don't know, that person could be the most giving, caring, loving person in the world, and you're judging them based off how they look. But it does fall in that category. I've heard people say that in that particular instance too. Just not me. I don't swim in the shallow end of the water.
It's just me. I'm just shallow.
Well, the other question that I would have too
I don't
is...
like to swim.
The other question I'd ask in that situation, or I would try to surmise in that situation, would be, if you're in the beginning of a relationship and everything is great, you might not have had the opportunity to start forming rules for that relationship. Mm-hmm. And so if there's no set guidelines, your eyes might not be open to things that other people are actually looking at, because in your mind, there's no breach of contract or anything like that, because you guys haven't had a conversation where we said, hey, well, we want to go by A, B, and C when we talk about what it is that we are.
Well, and somebody else is probably judging your relationship from their own perspective too, and what they would accept and what they would not accept.
All up in your business.
All up in your business.
That's what I would say.
So, you have that situation too, where I wouldn't say that that's necessarily love is blind. It's just different people. But if it's multiple people saying it, then maybe they got something. But at the same time, you're your own person and you should know what you can deal with and what you can't. Like, somebody might be like, I can't believe they do this all the time. And you're like, that doesn't bother me.
Yeah. So you hit on a very interesting point. I think the question becomes, who is saying that? Right. Who's saying love is blind, right? Yeah. Is it your nosy friends? Or is it your friends who actually have your best interest in mind? Mm-hmm. Is it, maybe a relative.
Somebody who just came out of a very bad relationship.
Exactly. So I think that, from the perspective of considering whether or not there is baggage on the side of the person who is saying that, or maybe not baggage, or, some other form of motivation, that's one thing that has to be taken into account. But then the real question, after having this brief conversation, the question that I would ask is love really blind? And when I say that, I'm talking about now, okay, well, you cannot see something, or you can see something and not say anything. So it's not a situation where the person who's bringing you flowers, the person who makes your heart flutter and you feel so cozy and your mood just goes sky high when you see him. It's not just a situation where all of that is preventing you from seeing the flaws. Could be a situation where you see him, but from your perspective, you're willing to push him to the side because of all of those other things.
Yeah. So to your point, and to answer your question, I don't know if love is blind. I think love is more accepting than it is blind.
It can be. I don't disagree with that. So the question becomes this. Define accepting, right? Mm-hmm. Because you can say love is accepting, and then you can also say love makes you stupid. Is what I mean by that. Listen, a person, you fall in love with someone. Mm-hmm. They don't open the door for you ever. You can accept that.
Yeah.
You fall in love with someone and they never say thank you. You can accept that. You fall in love with someone and they treat you like crap. You know what I mean? They talk about you in a negative perspective to all their friends. Are you going to accept that? I mean, some people do. Some people do. I do believe love is accepting, but I also think that there's a particular part that it's not so much people are accepting it, but I don't think it's more of I accept you for the whole you and all your flaws. I do think that there's an aspect of it, but I also think that there's an extreme where you shouldn't have to accept some things because they go beyond.
Well, right. And I think that's a different perspective. I feel like love is accepting. I'm just going to accept you for who you are. But that doesn't make it, I guess, right. You shouldn't have to accept certain things. And I, question then it's, why are they accepting that?
Well, I think I said this earlier. I think in the beginning, when you talk about these new relationships, they're ruled by the heart.
Yeah.
Ultimately, at some point, I was at 20 years, at some point, logic starts to take over, hopefully. And now you have a balance, because you could be in a situation where, all right, logic completely takes over and that heart is out the window. Now, everything that they do, they bother you. Right. This bastard done left the cap off the toothpaste. He got to go. You know what I mean?
Every little thing.
So I do think it's important to have that balance. But as time goes on, logically, you start to think about, well, you know what? I'm not willing to accept that anymore. That's not right.
Right.
I accept you for who you are, but some of your actions I can't accept, because those actions go against the way you say you feel about me or the way I feel I should be treated. So...
Yeah. Or even the reverse, if you think about it. You can't accept me for the way I am. You're always trying to change me.
That's true. Because that could be a flaw in your partner.
Yeah.
You got to let me be me. You understand? Me. I got to be me. And if you can't accept that.
If you can't accept me taking naps outside, I don't know.
I ain't got a problem with you taking a nap outside. I accept the fact that you take naps outside. I'm trying to warn you about the birds who sometimes target individuals like yourself.
I appreciate that.
Although they do say it's good luck. Go out there and get some bird,
just to make you
some
feel
bird
better.
doo-doo on here. So listen, is that like good conditioner?
Hell, it's just gross.
You get it in your hair, you work it in. That's like good conditioner.
It's not mayo.
Hey,
I don't even know it's mayo a thing anymore to put in your hair. I don't think so.
That's from.
I never did that.
What was his name? big, I can't remember his name from that 90 Day Fiance. You got me out here talking about 90 Day Fiance, putting mayonnaise in his head. Big Ed putting that mayonnaise in his head.
Yes.
I
But you're right. I think, again, we've talked about it before. A lot of marriages end in divorce. Is that like pretty much the turnover, right? From when you stop thinking solely with your heart and then you start adding a little bit of logic to it too.
I think that could be a portion of it. I think that at some point, the glitz and glamour of, I say glitz and glamour like I'm talking about Hollywood, but anyway, all that sparkle and, all those sparks and all those things as they start to die down. And I don't want to say die down, but as you start thinking more logically and you start talking about a future and some of the things that you used to let slide are more in the forefront because you're thinking logically about, okay, well, how do we proceed now? Mm-hmm. And that can cause an issue. Those things, you might have overlooked them in the beginning because, you were all starry-eyed with the good looks of the person who, you fell in love with. You saw his eyes and then realized he had a chipped tooth, and now you see his chipped tooth and you keep focusing on it. Can't
not see it. You ever gonna get that chipped tooth fixed?
This is me. This is me. I think that once you start thinking more logically, mm-hmm. now you start putting things in place to dictate, okay, what are these boundaries in your relationship? And it's not so much about boundaries, but once you start thinking more logically and you think about where you want to go, some of those flaws might start to actually become more in the forefront. And if they don't, let me rephrase that. It's not so much that they don't, but if you continue to ignore them, it could be that love is blind.
Well, and that's, I think, also where communication really starts to, the importance of it really starts to kick in. Because maybe you've been accepting of this for, 3 years. So now all of a sudden you have an issue with that.
Let me ask you this. If you've been ignoring, if love has been making you blind, either by choice or, again, you staring into his eyes, whose fault is that? And I guess I shouldn't say whose fault is it. Only if you're ignoring it.
If you see it and ignoring it,
if you see it and ignore it, then it's your fault. And I don't want to use the term fault, but at what if you ignored it for so long? Mm-hmm. What made you change to say, "Oh, I can't deal with this no more"?
Right, you're changing the rules of the game at this point. In the middle of the game, all of a sudden, I can't leave the cap off the toothpaste anymore.
Exactly. See, that's why you can't let your friends pressure you into situations. I mean, sometimes they do have to hold your eyes open because sometimes there's certain things that just go beyond the pale, but you got to make sure that, you clean your glasses, mm-hmm. put your specs on, and say, hey, smile. I want to see if you got any chipped teeth. I'm cool if you do, but I just want to see him now.
Please stand in front of me, do a full 360. Thank you.
I think when you start thinking with your head, there are less emotions mm-hmm. that are involved. And sometimes that gives you a clearer image of who an individual is. And obviously, if you have a clear picture of who an individual is, then the potential exists there that you might see something that you didn't see before. I'm not sure that there's truth behind the term love is blind. I do understand why some people say it, but I think it's more a situation where certain people just look at a situation and they weigh the benefits to that situation and they're willing to say, I can deal with some of the other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. And then to the point that, love, if you're in love with something, something, someone.
Let it go. If you love something, let it go.
If you are in love with someone, you need to accept them for who they are. But then to your point, do you really need to accept all of their flaws? That's where you need to really think about, what is it that I'm accepting because it's minor, and what is it that I'm accepting because you're, for lack of a better word from you before, because I'm just being stupid.
Yeah. And the funny thing, I didn't mention this and I didn't even think about it. The question becomes, if there's a flaw that you see, is that a flaw for me? I do think there are some things that just go beyond.
Yeah.
But someone might be looking at someone and saying, well, that's a flaw. And you might be saying, nah, I love that.
Yeah. I do not have a good idea
I mean,
on that one. I'm like, what flaw would I like?
I don't have a good example, and I've been going dark this whole conversation, so I'm not going to provide an example. I mean, I can think of a couple things, but I'll give you a perfect example. I just thought about this now as I'm sitting here staring at that bottle. I don't want to say the name because we don't want to be no shots, but let's say someone enjoys their libations a whole lot.
That's where I was just about to go.
You know what I mean? And you have friends and family say, hey, listen, he or she enjoys that a bit too much. You need to be careful. You might enjoy your libations a bit more than that person.
Right.
And you might be saying, hey, party.
Right. Don't bother me. What are you talking about? He does
Exactly.
less than me.
I think that, anytime you get in a new relationship, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, and I said that right. You get caught up in that initial phase, whether you want to call it the lust phase or whatever, but you really start loving with your heart, and your head really doesn't come into the picture. Well, for some people, your head doesn't come into the picture until later on in the game. And the other part about all that is, again, I just said this, what some people may see as a flaw, you might see as a positive.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that from one perspective, you just want to be mindful of the fact that everybody's human.
Yeah.
Everybody has some imperfections, but ultimately you're the one who chooses what you're willing to accept and what actions you're willing to accept and what actions and what traits you don't want to accept.
Yep.
And with that being said, I'm going to get into my realization of the week. We flowed right through this conversation.
Is that your realization?
No, that's not my realization of the week. My realization of the week is you need to make sure you don't get drawn into stupidity. I'm going to tell you what I mean. I told you yesterday I was riding to the Trek store, the drop-off tank.
Mm-hmm.
And as I'm going straight, there's a car who is taking a left on the opposite side of the road, and the guy almost hits me.
Yeah.
The guy starts running off at his mouth, which caused me to start running off. I got sucked in, and then a lady pulls up and she says, he's stupid.
Yeah.
Don't let him draw you in. And I stopped and I thought about it, and she was 100% correct.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let stupidity draw you in.
You can't fix stupid.
You sure can't. And with that, we're going to end this conversation. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
That's it for this week's episode of the Lunch with Sandy podcast. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your feedback and comments on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Lunch with Sandy. And be sure to follow us on your favorite podcast app. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to rate and review us. Thanks again for listening to the Lunch with Sandy podcast.